So good morning to those of you on Central Time. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Welcome to the University of Illinois System's 2022 Town Hall on Federal Issues. I'm Paul Weinberger, the Systems Director of Federal Relations. It's been a year now since a new administration and a new Congress arrived here in DC. And today we're going to be recapping our advocacy efforts over these past 12 months, as well as highlighting our priorities for legislative and executive action this year. We'll begin with a presentation from President Tim Killeen, followed by a question and answer period. Some of you have already submitted questions. Thank you for that, and we look forward to answering those. Feel free to put any other questions you may have in the chat. I think we've all been well trained by now on how that works. With that, it is my distinct privilege to introduce the 20th president of the University of Illinois System, Dr. Timothy Killeen. President Killeen took office in May 2015 and has led a new wave of growth for the state's flagship university system. We'll be hearing some updates on that shortly. He brings with him more than 3 decades of experience as a teacher, researcher, and administrator in public higher education and the federal government. I'll note as well that that somewhat intimidating resume includes serving as head of geosciences at the agency that provides more than a quarter of federal research funding for US universities. I'm referring, of course, to the National Science Foundation, which we'll be hearing more about today as well. With that, please join me in welcoming President Killeen.
Yeah, hello everybody. Can you hear me, Paul? And I'm online. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, Paul, for the introduction. And thanks to all of you. If I come across a little distracted, it's because my daughter's due date is today for our first grandchild. But I'll try to stay calm as we go forward. But I'm really excited to connect with you all, our alumni, advocates, other friends, notably in the DC connection. And I really hope that you and your families are safe as we work our way through these challenges that we continue to face as a country. And I'm looking forward to be able to gather in person again someday soon. I think we're all desperately looking forward to gathering more in person as we go forward. This meeting is going to be an annual event. The second time we've called the group together is this one, to share our federal priorities for the year ahead. And we thank you for participating and being aware of what those priorities are, and perhaps even helping us be successful. Our meeting last year in 2021 was very productive, and we greatly appreciate, and I appreciate personally, the advocacy over the past 12 months. It really has impact and successes that we can, with your help, continue to build on as we go forward into 2022. And I'll talk about some of those shortly. But first, let me update you all on some of the exciting things happening across the U of I system since we last met. For starters, this is our big news: system-wide enrollment reaching a record high 94,750 students last fall in the middle of a global pandemic. Families and students voting with their feet to join us. Enrollment, in fact, is on a steady upward march, increasing by more than 16% over the past 7 years. And I'm proud to say that we would fill both of those stadiums with our current students, with about 10,000 people waiting to get in as well. I'm proud to say, too, that the students enrolled across our system are, and that's those are the 2 big stadiums in Chicago. So we have a lot of mostly young, but not all young, non-traditional learners as well, making progress in their educational and career goals. Almost 60,000 of our undergraduates come from the state of Illinois. And that's an unusually high percentage from Illinois. Most Big Ten schools, for example, have much lower fractions from their home state. So that's more than half of all the Illinois residents enrolled in public universities in the state of Illinois. More than 26% of these students come from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. And that's more than 25,000 students, an increase of 69% over the past decade. And every one of the last 8 years, those numbers have grown. 1 out of every 5 of these U of I system students is the first in their family to ever attend college. And that's more than twice as high as our first generation enrollment a decade ago. And between our 3 universities, we have students from 101 Illinois counties, which is all but one county. So we're working on that last county. This growth is a function of our commitment to excellence in education, world-class educational outcomes, but also to accessibility and affordability as families struggle with paying their bills and so forth. And the high cost of higher education is something that we're continuously working on. So we're working to keep our world-class educational product affordable by holding down tuition costs. In the last 8 years, we froze tuition for 6 of those years. So tuition has been frozen in all but 2 years since 2015, even as inflation increased our expenditures. And that's to the benefit of our student body. We're also committed to providing increased financial aid at levels that make a real difference in the lives of our students. And the university system, for example, this year is providing $261 million in financial aid, a figure that has increased by 122 million over the last decade, so almost doubled over the last decade. And this is an addition and supplements the $279 million in federal, state, and other outside aid available to our students this year. So the institution, through generous gifts and fundraising efforts, doubles the state and federal investment in financial aid. And the vital assistance is the reason that about 30% of all of those students in those stadiums pay no tuition at all. And only a quarter of our students pay the full price. So there's a lot of defraying of cost that we're committed to. And a notable feature of that is, of course, keeping tuition down. Another major source of pride for me is the fact that almost 2 years into the pandemic, I can say that our students have remained, for the most part, on campus, no U-turns, safely attending classes and enjoying much of the typical college experience as possible. We have not had a student be severely ill, and we've not lost a student. Sports events, concerts, and museum exhibits have continued on all 3 campuses. And our positivities for our testing, which I'll talk about momentarily, is always below the positivity rates of the surrounding communities. So relatively speaking, our campuses are among the safest places to be. And I credit our students, faculty, and staff for taking common sense measures like mask wearing seriously, for getting one of the available vaccines that we tested. Incidentally, we did vaccine clinical trials. But every bit as important has been what we are very proud of. It's called the SHIELD saliva-based test and trace system. And I spoke to you last year about it, when we had one full successful semester under our belts with very low infection rates on our campuses. But in the years since, the SHIELD system has been greatly expanded far beyond our universities. It is saving lives and protecting communities across Illinois and well beyond. SHIELD is based on a low-cost, rapid turnaround, non-invasive saliva test with digital results provided that is extremely accurate because it's PCR-based, also able to distinguish Omicron from Delta and other things. And through our SHIELD Illinois nonprofit and a strong partnership with Governor Pritzker and the Illinois Department of Public Health, this process is now in use in more than 1,700 K-12 schools around the state. All community colleges, all public universities, the state legislature, the state judiciary are all using our SHIELD testing, and the results come back sometimes 6 hours, always less than 18 hours. And these tests are also the first line of defense in 57 other colleges and universities, at 19 free community testing sites across the state, and in businesses like ADM and Rivian and other university systems. In fact, SHIELD testing is now available to 1 in 3 Illinois residents, and 1 million people have access to it. And you may read about antigen versus PCR, et cetera. And we were asked to give a briefing just recently to the White House and FDA that the speed of the accurate PCR test And the fact that saliva is such an effective medium for assessing infectivity means that this is a really important contribution. And it came out of our brilliant faculty and got deployed to safeguard our campuses and the educational mission. Another system, so Shield Illinois is within Illinois as a non-for-profit. We have a commercial company called Shield T3, and it's using to spread the use of Shield outside the state. And as some of you may already know and maybe benefit from, Shield testing through Shield T3 is now protecting students and staff in DC public schools and in the Baltimore City public schools. And 4 DC universities, American University, Catholic, Godelet, and Marymount, are also relying on Shield tests to keep students, faculty, and staff healthy. So it's a remarkable example, one of many, I would say, of the power of a research-intensive, comprehensive, public land-grant university system, and of the innovation that can affect the public good when needed in a crisis mode, but also absent a crisis. So in spite of all the limitations, though, that we're still operating under because of the pandemic, Paul, our leader, and Melissa Haas and their colleagues in our Office of Government Relations have been hard at work advancing our agenda, both in the nation's capital and in Illinois. Next week, we'll hear from Governor Pritzker on his next budget, and we're hopeful that there will be good news for public higher education, notably for the U of I next week. Like all of us in advocacy, our team has harnessed the power of Zoom, starting with the virtual Spring into DC advocacy event last April. And in a normal year, this would have been our system fly-in day in DC, and we're really looking forward to returning to that. You can see Representative Quigley on the screen here. So we're doing a lot with Zoom, and I like to point out that University of Illinois created the first ever chat room that was the precursor to Zoom, and created the first ever educational software, which now is sort of so heavily needed and has been for the last couple of years, to say nothing of the browser and the internet capabilities. So a lot of the functions that have kept us going flowed out of U of I innovation over many decades. So in the course of roughly 20 meetings since then with members of Congress and staff since April, we've been able to focus on the need for greater federal investment in higher education affordability, obviously a key priority of ours, as well as in the kinds of R&D that helps build a sustainable forward-looking economy. And this includes, as you all know, workforce development to ensure that the citizens of Illinois and the rest of the country are ready for what's needed and what's ahead. We also hosted 3 virtual webinars. We call them altogether extraordinary virtual webinars last year for federal and state legislators and their staff members. Thank you for many of you participating in that, highlighting, of course, SHIELD, as well as the rapidly developing Illinois Innovation Network and its centerpiece, the Discovery Partners Institute in Chicago. IIN, the Illinois Innovation Network, and DPI, the Discovery Partners Institute, are both up and running and yielding amazing results. As I saw myself on a 3-part state tour last fall, where we did 2,000 miles visiting 15 or several of the 15 IIN hubs that for the most part are in public, associated with public universities around the state, up and down the state. And their work is focused on local strengths and needs, regionally tailored innovation opportunities that create new jobs and can help lift the societies. In Chicago, DPI's headquarters is now being designed. The land has been donated to us on the Chicago River. And we're very excited about what's going to be an iconic building in downtown Chicago. But the work is already underway at our temporary headquarters on South Wacker Drive. Just one example, DPI is partnering with Urbana-Champaign, the University UIUC, on a program to train K-12 computer science teachers to make sure that K-12 students around the state can leave primary school with skills that they will need to take on jobs in a technology-based economy, digital competency, for young people. Because if young people can't imagine participating, there are going to be obstacles that are going to be difficult to overcome. So we're working on the K through 12 pipeline or pathways, if you like, to provide on-ramps for young people to get skills and capabilities that will enable them to thrive in civil society. A particular federal priority for us last year was advocacy for greater funding of Pell Grants. More than 21,000 of our students, that's a third of all undergraduates, benefit from federal Pell Grants. So it's an incredibly important program for us. And we've been part of a national campaign urging Congress to double the investment in Pell as we mark the 50th anniversary of the program, and also to expand the maximum award to $13,000 so it keeps pace with inflation. Some of our most devoted advocates, like many of you, joined in this advocacy effort. In response to a call for action from the system in June, more than 1,600 people sent more than 5,000 messages to Congress in support of doubling the investment in Pell. This is the kind of call to action that's going to really help young people access educational opportunities. And I can't tell you what it means to us at the university to see and appreciate that kind of response from people like yourselves who care about providing opportunities for the future. And Urbana Chancellor Robert Jones was invited to testify before the House Education and Labor Committee in late July about the importance of Pell. So let's keep that up, even as some of these budgetary initiatives are deferred or get delayed. Another priority for us last year was in seeking federal support for universities and students as we grappled with the fiscal impact of the pandemic. In January, we led the other public universities from Illinois in writing to our congressional delegation and making representations seeking increased pandemic relief. And this was an effort that succeeded. And without it, we would have been in some difficulty as the expenditures that were required, particularly in that first year of the pandemic, were very significant. And we had to focus on health and safety of our community. The U of I system, thanks to your efforts and others, received $173 million from the American Rescue Plan enacted in March. Close to half of that, $84 million, went right out for badly needed student financial aid. Students whose families may have lost their jobs for no reason of their own, suddenly encountered significant financial difficulties. And we added to that another $34 million that we were able to generate for emergency pandemic relief for student aid. So we were also pleased by the enactment of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in November. This is a big deal for us. With our expertise in everything from transportation to smart sensing technologies, for buildings to climate research, U of I faculty are extremely well positioned to benefit from many of the funding opportunities in that bill. Things like pourable concrete, beams that beam home when they need some maintenance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The built environment. The infrastructure bill also includes, importantly, funding for broadband and an authorization for a rail R&D center of excellence. And as you know, Illinois is a nexus for rail and transportation and logistics and supply chain issues that are very critically important these days. But we're happy with the Rail R&D Center for Excellence. It's something we've been working forward towards for years on behalf of researchers at Urbana's RailTech and UIC's Urban Transportation Center. We think we can really participate and help the nation with its rail technology. We particularly owe Senators Durbin and Duckworth and Representative Newman our gratitude for their efforts to help stand up this new rail center. Illinois' public universities have also joined forces to advocate on behalf of President Biden's Build Back Better Act because it had so much to offer our area. And the version passed by the House included a $550 million increase for the $550 increase for the maximum Pell Grant Award. Not everything we asked for, but significant progress, and investments in federal R&D. The president has said he remains optimistic that pieces of this landmark legislation could still be passed, so there may be more opportunities for advocacy to lend our voices in support. Our engagement efforts also extended to the leadership of federal agencies that are key partners in so much of the research mission. In December, for example, Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm toured the UIUC campus, including the Illinois Energy Farm, the Integrated Bioprocessing Research Laboratory, and the Abbott Power Plant to hear about our carbon capture efforts. UI Health in Chicago was the first stop last fall for Surgeon General Vivek Murthy during a national listening tour in which he thanked healthcare professionals for their heroic and ongoing work to save lives through the pandemic. So we're in touch with agency leaders on a regular basis. And federal funding continues to fuel the kind of breakthrough research our universities are known for. Here's Surgeon General. The Prairie Research Institute at Urbana-Champaign, for example, is leading large-scale pilot testing of carbon capture technology at a power plant in Springfield. By demonstrating effective and economic carbon capture, this project intends to stimulate commercialization and wider adoption of carbon capture technology. At UIC, the University of Illinois Chicago had an absolutely incredible year in terms of sponsored research, receiving more than $450 million in sponsored research, an all-time high for UIC. And that included a lot of pandemic research on boosters and vaccine, clinical trials, therapeutics, et cetera. Also included $4.2 million from NIH to study the safety and effectiveness of blood thinners to treat adults diagnosed with COVID-19. So looking at the year ahead, this is where we really need you all again to speak out for public higher education and for the U of I in particular. We will wait for resolution of fiscal year 2022 appropriations. And as we do every year, we'll be in touch with agencies and representatives, and we'll advocate strongly for programmatic and U of I specific priorities for FY 23 as well. While the Build Back Better bill stalled out last month, as I mentioned, President Biden says he's optimistic that part of it could become reality. So we'll continue to advocate for a more robust and better funded Pell program, top priority for us, and for increases in federal R&D spending, both through regular appropriations and through a potentially slimmed down act. We'll also be keeping a close eye on congressional negotiations regarding the Endless Frontier Act, which was subsumed into a larger bill aimed at expanding US competition with China called the US Innovation and Competition Act. That legislation, passed by the Senate in June, would provide a much needed boost in authorized funding for the National Science Foundation, an agency where I spent 4 years of my time, as well as establishing a new, very exciting NSF directorate focused on technology applications and applied research. And I know that the agency is ready to really run hard with this opportunity should it become a reality. The House is about to pass its own version of the authorization bill, the America Competes Act 2022. And I'm pleased to see strong bipartisan support for the nation's premier agency funding scientific research. And as you know, we're very strong participants in NSF research at the U of I. Immigration issues are also on our docket, including DACA. They remain high priorities for our system. We've been pleased that the administration is working to put DACA on a firmer regulatory footing. We have students who are directly concerned about this. And it's an important step to ease uncertainty that has hung over them, the lives of so many, including a number of our students. As I said, given the threat of ongoing litigation, we'll also continue to urge Congress to enact comprehensive immigration reform that includes the DREAM Act. So we're going to advocate for that. The international talent pipeline is absolutely vital for our universities. Our excellence is a magnet for both students and top teaching and research talent. So we'll continue to advocate for legislation and administrative action to encourage timely visa processing and the expansion of high-skilled immigration programs. This year, we're going to be opening up permanent offices in India and in Mexico to facilitate student exchange and student recruitment in those important areas as well. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are clearly long-term and really important priorities for us. And we're proud to stake out a leadership position on DEI. For example, UIC is leading a new consortium of Hispanic-serving research institutions. In fact, all of the R1 research-intensive Hispanic-serving research institutions are working together, and there was a recent meeting with the White House and also at NSF with that regard. So I'm proud of our leadership there. Our push to provide more financial aid is also part of this commitment to diversity. Growth in financial aid will help us open our doors wider and provide greater access to world-class education. Also on our radar in advocacy, the Department of Education is expected to issue a notice on proposed rulemaking for Title IX this spring, perhaps as early as April. The system, U of I system, strongly opposed the changes to Title IX that went into effect in 2020 for specific reasons. And so we'll be closely monitoring this process, hopefully make sure the new rule fixes outstanding issues. We remain hopeful that once the Omicron wave subsides, we'll be able to return to more in-person activities, including events and advocacy in DC. And I can tell you, our students are thrilled to be back in class, walking around a campus, wearing masks, heavily vaccinated, 95% vaccination at all 3 of our campuses. It's safe to live, work, and study at the University of Illinois. And so I hope you can see from these remarks that there's a lot to be proud of in the year we've just finished. Our response to the pandemic was, I think, a national model, but it needed and included your steadfast support. But as we go forward, and we're starting to think now about the post-pandemic university, what that looks like, how to take advantage of all of the new expertise in distance education, in use of technology, in building out pipelines for young people in K through 12 to imagine themselves in the digital economy, in our innovation agenda, which is now being mimicked in other states, frankly, the Illinois Innovation Network and the Discovery Partners Institute, and in our global connectivity, and in just the research excellence. And we will be recruiting and faculty in the next 5 years at a very high rate, because our student enrollment has grown by 16,000 in the last 6 years or so. We need now to recruit and retain world-class faculty. And when we do that, it'll add even more vitality and vibrancy into the U of I system. So thanks for being here this morning, this afternoon, wherever you happen to be. And I'm happy to try and take your questions, and we'll pass back to Paul for that, to moderate that.
President Killeen, thank you very much for that very comprehensive overview of clearly what's been a busy year for both the system and the federal government. As mentioned, we've gotten a few questions already. Please put any more questions you may have in the chat, and we'll try to get to them in the time we have remaining. I'm going to start with the question that we received a couple days ago by one of the registrants. It's a two-part question. What are the chances of, one, the state lowering the cost of higher education, and two, the feds canceling some student debt?
Well, thank you. Thanks for that question. As I kind of hopefully pointed out, the cost, the affordability of higher education is a really important aspect of our mission. We can't conduct a higher education public mission if it's too expensive for talented college-ready youngsters to go. So this is really important for us. You talk about the state lowering the cost of higher ed. The partnership with the state is pivotal for us. And I can assure you that we're working intensively with the state legislative community, with the administration, and in fact, all of the other public universities. And we're launching a campaign this week to really make the case, lay out the value proposition for state funding, which would primarily then alleviate the cost of higher ed for our student body. You've already heard we've done a lot, and our student debt averages at the U of I are way below the national averages for student debt because of our efforts. Our, students, we track everything we can. We look at student debt default rates, and we're about 3 times below the national default rate for student debt. So we're very concerned about the cost, and that's why we're focusing on our own financial aid. But the state is an important partner, and in the state of Illinois, the Constitution says the state shall enable through resources public education writ large to go forward. I'm very optimistic that the bipartisan legislature and the governor's administration are supportive of public higher education, particularly at the University of Illinois, and we will see a return to a perspective of investment in higher education. Maybe a few percent, maybe hopefully but more than inflation, but it'll be going in the right direction and not in the wrong direction, which is too frequently done in the last 20, 30 years, which has led to old increases in tuition. So we're keeping our tuition down significantly below inflation. We're increasing our financial aid, and we're urging the state to reinvest in public higher education. And it's not only because of the cost, it's also because of the return on that investment. If you look at a dollar from a student who gets a degree, that dollar, the return on that investment is like 15% per year for lifetime. So the investment in prosperity in the state, in jobs, U of I system is responsible for about 141,000 jobs in the state of Illinois. And we calculate that the economic impact of that investment by the state in the state is over $17 billion per year. And those dollars show up every year, whatever is happening with the stock market. So we make the case, I would say shamelessly, forcefully, perhaps is a better word, that an investment by the state in research intensive, particularly public higher education, pays off in many ways. It creates jobs, it deals with healthcare, it provides opportunities for people to have careers, raise families, buy homes, participate in voting and in civil society in amazing. As you can probably tell, I'm passionate about this relationship with the state. We've got the word Illinois in our name, and it needs to be manifested. I'm more than confident. I know that Governor Pritzker agrees with this value proposition and will do everything he can in his administration and the bipartisan state legislature to help the basis of support for higher ed, and that will lower the cost, as you asked in the first part of your question. Now, what are the chances of the feds canceling some student debt? I think that's what you asked, Paul. Well, you've probably seen already, President Biden has moved to provide roughly $15 billion in targeted student debt cancellation for disabled folks, for borrowers who maybe were defrauded by lending institutions, et cetera. And I think that effort will continue. So I think the chances are good. I noticed that Senator Warren just said just very recently that the White House is looking at decisions with regard to student loan cancellation. So we're trying to pay close attention through Paul and his team in what's going on. We support anything that would alleviate the fiscal barriers and impediments to accessing world-class educational outcomes, because it just lifts not only the individuals who, and we graduate 23,000 people a year. With the most recent graduations, I wasn't handshaking them all because we did like fist bumps and nodding of heads because of the COVID. That's a lot of people, I can tell you that. It's like a small town coming off the product line. And of those graduates, undergraduate degrees, we know that about 77% of them stay in Illinois, work in Illinois, get jobs in Illinois, pay taxes, and participate. So it's a machine that has grown with our student enrollment and grown in importance and is providing all of these other public good assets like the SHIELD testing, which is the other thing I didn't mention, I want to mention is SHIELD testing in public schools has pioneered the test to stay approach, where rather than send all of those kids who may have been exposed home and have their parents have to drop everything and disrupt the family life, if you test every other day with SHIELD testing, those students can stay in those educational settings safely. And we know that 98% of those K through 12 students in our system that have been exposed are able to stay and learn and continue safely with the test to stay efforts that we've been pioneering. And I also note that CDC has, but I'm obviously rambling with your question right now, so I'll go back to Paul for the next one.
No, there was a lot to cover in that. Thank you. Next question on a completely different topic. Is there anything the university can do or is doing to address civil discord and threats to our democratic form of government?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. Education is so important to civil society. That's the kind of way I would start it. We are a partisan entity, right, that focuses on education in a comprehensive way. We want our students, our graduates, to have knowledge, to be able to read and discern and speak and participate in debates, to listen to things that they maybe disagree with in ways that are respectful and make their cases about what they feel strongly about, and just be of additive value to society. And I think that is really important as we move forward, that that we don't, assume that civil discord and threats are things that we have to assume in our future, but we work as an engine of citizenry. And of course, we have in our guiding principles at the University of Illinois, we have a strong statement with regard to our commitment to civic engagement, so that we can be proud of, they can be proud of the institution that their alma mater. We can be proud that global citizens who are engaged in their communities are participating, and they are educated. And we are obviously, as a university with a lot of research, we're seekers after the truth. And if something's not true, then we need to further understand how to counteract things that might be misleading in fundamental ways. But we avoid getting drawn into political discussions that may have underlying principles. That's our role is to educate the citizenry, and to do that embracing also viewpoint diversity, not just diversity of ethnic and cultural and racial background, but also viewpoint diversity too, so that our whole community can engage in important conversations about the future. So with all of that said, I think we're fundamentally in the right place. What is it Abraham Lincoln said? Put your feet in the right place and then stand firm. I think that's what we need to do for our educational mission. We need to recognize our role and to stand firm in that role, and that is education. Obviously, as I've talked, we want to open our doors as wide as possible. We want to embrace diversity. We want to embrace our students, notably, of course, from Illinois, rural, urban, different socioeconomic backgrounds. international students. We want to create and deploy new knowledge that's helpful for society. And that's where we stand firm with that regard. That's kind of my attempt at answering that question.
I think that's a good one. How is the U of I system responding to the need to reduce health disparities?
That's another great question. And we need to respond to health disparities. This is on our watch. So we feel, we have the state healthcare system, the hospital system. We never turn anybody away, but we also do the highest of high-end robotic surgeries, organ transplants, vaccine, clinical trials, etc. So we have 7 health science colleges in Chicago and a 13 clinic distribution of clinics in very hard-hit communities as up and down the state. Our extension processes are in pretty much every county one way or another. So we need to work on health disparities. And just a personal comment, I did this trip around the state. We did 2,000 miles and it's noteworthy. There's a 10-year difference in life expectancy as you go from DuPage County to Harlan County in the southernmost part. That's a significant health disparity that's connected to food insecurity, to health insecurity, to job creation, socioeconomic circumstances, and environmental factors. This is on our watch. We've got expertise in every field: nursing, physicians, IT specialists, all of the issues in agriculture and food and distribution. So, and up and down the state, you've got this disparity. Even in Chicago, if you go just 6 miles west from our campus, the life expectancy drops another 8-9 years. So we're looking at health disparities from a research but interventionist perspective as well. We look after the health of populations. In our hospital, which is, as we speak, 96% full, right? The beds are taken, but thankfully COVID patients are coming down from an all-time high of 140 a couple of weeks ago to maybe 80 now. So, but we take care of the of patients who have health problems. I'm proud to say that if you look at our UIC hospital, over 45% of the patients are African American. Over 25% of the patients are Latino. So we're looking after Black and brown patients, which speaks to some of the health disparity issues. We need to reduce them. We need to have recognize the responsibility the university has, working with hospital groups and other players, of course, to take this on. And in fact, there are conversations underway on how we can do a better job, a more assertive job in dealing with population health. And it touches on things like digital communication, transportation, food insecurity is a huge piece of this puzzle. If there is a food desert, that naturally leads to healthcare disparities, and those are issues that need expertise. Business colleges, education colleges. So we have the broadband expertise to take this on, these kind of things on, and we need to do it assertively. And I'm proud of what we're doing. We need to do more. We have all kinds of programs in underserved and marginalized communities that need support and access, and they need it there where they live, and there need to be jobs. So it's a socioeconomic piece of it as well. Our whole innovation agenda is a little different from what you might read about with Silicon Valley or Kendall Square, or even Georgia Tech Square. Our innovation agenda, which is really cooking now, is designed from its outset to provide access to underserved communities. not just to create the IPOs and the billionaires, we'll do that too, but to lift society up. And that is an important underpinning part of your question about how do we respond to the need to reduce health disparities. But that said, health disparities exist in our state and in our city and in our settings, and it leads sometimes to crime as well. And so crime prevention is another aspect of this. And so this is on our watch, on our time, 2022, we need to get even more intense efforts underway here. And I think your work helping us with our federal advocacy, helping us with our statewide advocacy is going to all be incredibly important as we go forward. And the thing about it is you can do it and lift all boats in the harbor, including the highest tech, the companies that might be attracted to the workforce, a diverse workforce, et cetera. So there's a win-win-win approach to doing this, and that we want to be part of the solutions writ large on this topic. Thanks for the question. It's an important question.
Well, you've talked about preserving democracy and addressing health disparities. So the next question maybe follows from that. Another great challenge facing our society, climate change. How do you foresee the U of I system contributing to COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, and to climate change issues generally?
Another huge question for which we are, incredibly important to take on the issues of global environmental change. Let me start, if I might, with a little personal thing, because I was at NSF the head of the geosciences and co-chaired the multi-agency strategic plan. This is like 10 years ago now, on global change, including global climate change. And so worked with DOD, DOE, NSF, obviously NOAA, the federal and internationally on this topic as well. There needs to be a knowledge base brought into life that deals with adaptation, mitigation, response, simulation, high performance simulation of outcomes, looking at, probabilistic outcomes. I could go on and on and on about this topic since it's been, but I do remember back in, I think it was maybe 89, I was in the American Geophysical Union leadership. The American Geophysical Union, AGU, is the largest international professional society for scientists involved in the study of planet Earth, right? And including climate, weather, earthquakes, et cetera. And so we had our first statement on climate change. And I always remember, and this is with a really bit of embarrassment, the phrase, uncertainty should not preclude action. This is back in the late 80s. A triple negative, right? A triple negative. So I remember being at a meeting at the National Press Club where I was one of the 4 scientists presenting this statement, the first statement by AGU. And boy, the press, carved us up into pieces. What do you mean by, can't you be clearer in that? And it got coupled in with the politics of the day as well. So I think we know enough about the second law of thermodynamics. Let's face it, you increase evaporation in the Pacific Ocean, change the temperature of the world's oceans by a degree, you're going to get more significant extrema in weather events. And we're seeing that clearly. Weather exists to move energy from surplus to deficit, and is going to find very creative ways to do it if you've got a stronger gradient between the surplus and the deficit. So we're going to be in having to adapt to significant disruption going forward. And again, there are going to be disparities here. This is more predictable than anything in the stock market. So we need to build our scientific body and not just the biophysical underpinnings of what's happening and why, and the mitigation opportunities, but the human factors, the societal decision-making under risk and uncertainty factors. All of those are research areas, but also areas where society needs to respond. So the U of I system is committed to advancing the understanding and to helping ensure that we respond appropriately to this huge challenge of our times. My first grandchild's about to be born, right? This is personal for me. So we're obviously working with the international communities. I'm proud that we are one of the initial members of the International Universities Climate Alliance. We're working with top universities in Australia and around the world, trying to pull our weight for this. And I do see our own system as a model, perhaps even an inspiring model for environmental sustainability, using all of the tools and technologies at our disposal, including smart buildings, renewable energy systems, effective use of agriculture. We're well known for our agricultural research. Some of the greenhouse gases, a lot of them come from agricultural activities as well. There are better ways to do that, perhaps with carbon uptake in agriculture that we're looking at very carefully. So we have to play a role in all of this, and I think this arena is going to be one where students of the future are going to want to see understanding, solutions orientation to dealing with these issues, and obviously all the factors about the global expression of these environmental challenges. It's not just one country; it's all everywhere, and we need to find a path that will mitigate, that will adapt, safeguard human experience, provide for health and welfare of global populations in ways that are based on the best available scientific knowledge and understanding. And we're at the very cutting edge of all of that in our university.
Thank you for that. The next question relates to federal R&D. What is the University of Illinois doing to increase its share of defense, science, and engineering funding?
Today, the UVI system is the state's leading recipient of DoD funding, research funding. We're doing a lot already. I think we're, in fact, ranked in the 20s in the country for DoD funding. So we're not a small player for DoD funding. We've recently been working to strengthen our partnerships across the board. The Army has an open campus initiative, and DARPA is funding several UIUC projects. We have great strength in what you might call cybersecurity and digital capabilities. We're working at a very high level on securing the national electrical grid for the Department of Energy. DoD is involved, etc. And we have just initiated what's called a SCIF, which is a sensitive compartmental information facility, which enables for classified research to be undertaken at UIUC's research park, not on the campus, but on the research park. DoD researchers are interested in COVID-19 prevention, mitigation, therapeutic development. So we have a lot of interfaces with the Department of Defense, and I believe they're growing and importance. We are very sensitive and pay a lot of attention to what you might call foreign interference and intellectual property being taken in unscrupulous ways. And so we work with federal agencies on that too, and make sure that we're compliant and careful about preserving what's needed for the United States in our kind of competitive posture. So I do see that going. So if the question was, why do we have less than our fair share? I think we have a fair share, but we're growing that with, particularly in the cyber arena. I'd say agriculture is as well another really important arena for Department of Defense. Societal unrest, wherever it is, can lead to calls and constraints on the US. And so I think some of the work we're doing with productivity of plants is going to be important for the for future famine relief and things like that. Also use of water and so forth. And those are DoD areas as well that are going to be important as we go forward. Thanks, Paul. These are not softballs.
No, but I think you're doing okay. We're almost out of time, but I think we can fit in these next two. I'll package them together because they both relate to hiring. So one is, you mentioned an increase in hiring new faculty. What areas, what sectors, across what schools will we see these additions? And then the other question relates to, how is the system working to increase diversity and inclusion across its faculty?
Okay, well, let me touch on the first one first, and then you may have to remind me by the time I get through it on the second one. So yeah, we did a strategic plan for faculty recruitment 2 or 3 years ago. We're updating it now because of the pandemic and the explosive growth we've seen in the student enrollment. So I don't have the current numbers, but we will shortly have the provosts and the deans all develop the. But I can tell you what my understanding from our earlier work is that we're going to be recruiting 900 faculty in the next 6-7 years, 900 colleagues, and half of them roughly will be to replace retirements, but half of them will be net new because of our growth. And in our analysis, we don't do it across the board. We look at supply, demand, this college, that college, where there's growth and interest, where the students are flowing, what we anticipate going forward, where there may be opportunities sort of for competition. But we want to, in all of this, we maintain our comprehensive outlook. Arts, humanities, music, dance, poetry, theater, they're all in this, as well as STEM fields, technical fields, and business and engineering. So we have a plan, and it's an exciting plan because we're going to be recruiting the best of the best, is the way I look at it. We're going to get an amazing, pulse of new talent based on what we've already got. We need to retain talented faculty as well. We do look at competition, and there was a time during the budgetary impasse a few years ago where University of Illinois was seen as a poaching ground, right? We can, from other places, look like Illinois doesn't have its budgetary act together. Let's go and recruit some top line faculty. That did happen a little bit, but we put on a stiff resistance, and retention efforts were largely successful. Now we're poaching, not being poached. We're the poacher, not the poachee right now. And I launched a thing called Stellar Faculty Recruitment just a few years ago, and just in the last 2 or 3 years, we've recruited 24 world-class faculty from little known places like Duke and Harvard and Oxford, England, and Texas A&M and University of Washington, etc. Why are they interested in coming to Illinois? It's because of our culture of collaboration, multidisciplinarity, the facilities, the excellence of the student body. So when you talk about going to 900 in the next, a lot of them will be assistant professors. And we need, and the second part of your question, diversification. So we're working on that too. We need to have both a student body and a faculty body that more accurately reflects the diversity of the population writ large. And so we have programs along those lines that don't contravene any rules, or we don't do quotas or anything like that. But we make sure that we put together candidate lists that are reflective of diversity of background, socioeconomic status, and other dimensions as well. And I'm excited about how that's going. A couple of the things that I think speak to this is we now are using the Common App, makes it easier for students to apply. We have relationships with community colleges, makes it easier for students to transfer. We have programs, makes it easier to go from graduate school to postdocs into the faculty ranks. and we put a value on diversity in all aspects. So I'm kind of excited that we have, with the growth and the importance and the research volume, we had $1.1 billion of research last year in the middle of a pandemic. Very, very strong capabilities. Our influence is felt everywhere. The Shield example of setting up a commercial company that's like $100 million company in 1 year, and we can do that for many, many other things, and is going to be attractive to candidates. So as we go into this next phase, we want to grow our own in a diverse way, but we want to recruit as well. And I think one of the things that Illinois has got going for it is you can buy a house, it's affordability. You can take your kids to the swimming pool in the Y, and you can eat out. You can, we've got all the fresh water you could ever want. We've got arable soil. We've got leisure and amenities, and we've got fantastic institutions. And if we all pull together, we can really lead a charge in the whole Midwest, I think, in terms of excellence, global engagement, et cetera. So everything comes down to faculty. You need to have, for a world-class education experience, you're going to have world-class faculty. And we're blessed with having that. And we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity to build out even more with an innovation agenda that is about public good, as well as taking advantage of our technological prowess. Yeah. So again,
that's a perfect place for us to stop. President Killeen, thank you so much for spending the hour with us. I want to thank our alumni and advocates as well for calling in, for their support, for their advocacy over the past year and this coming year as well. We look forward to staying in touch. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your Friday.